Not every new stadium is going to be immediately embraced by fans or hailed as a modern classic. However, they also shouldn't be rendered obsolete before these facilities ever host a game. That, over the years, has proven easier said than done. With that in mind, here are 11 stadiums that were outdated before they even opened. Some of these have redeeming qualities, while others were simply a victim of their era. Whatever the case may be, none of these stadiums were able to withstand the test of time. They didn't even come close. The only reason that the ballpark at Arlington is on this list is that it was completed shortly before retractable roof technology became prevalent. Safeco Field, Bank One Ballpark, Enron Field, all of these stadiums would be completed a few years later with retractable roofs and climate-controlled atmospheres. Meanwhile, in the Dallas Metroplex, Texas Rangers fans baked in the brutal summer heat. Other than that, the ballpark at Arlington is pretty snazzy to this day. It's cool they still found a way to use this stadium because it doesn't really deserve to be destroyed. But the lack of a roof did mean it was outdated before the thing ever opened. Here are a list of NFL stadiums that opened in the year 2002. You tell me which one is the most outdated. Seahawks Stadium, Energy Field, Ford Field, or Gillette Stadium. It's clearly, without question, without debate, the home of the New England Patriots. While the other three have easily withstood the test of time, the latter faces back towards what was being built in the 90s. That's because New England Patriots owner and sometimes Happy Tugs patron Robert Kraft modeled his facility after MT&T Stadium in Baltimore. Unfortunately, that meant it looked like a relic of the past before a game was even played here. Credit to where credit is due, though, for Gillette Stadium. It was completely privately financed by Patriots ownership, and that, I think, is pretty cool. The Omni Coliseum in Atlanta was a visual marvel. It was also a disaster before the damn thing even opened. For starters, the exterior began rusting as soon as it went up and never stopped. And while that was obviously less than ideal, it didn't make the facility outdated per se. The reason it makes this list is because the Omni Coliseum had no club seating and a paltry 16 luxury boxes when it opened. That proved to be a significant drag on the Atlanta Flames in particular, who, despite having solid overall attendance, were never really able to make money. This was the major reason cited by the Flames owner when he sold the team to a businessman in Calgary who would obviously go on and move the franchise away from Atlanta. Let's stay in Atlanta, but change sports. Converting Centennial Olympic Stadium into Turner Field was nothing more than a marriage of convenience. Even with the baseball elements incorporated into the original design, the end result was always underwhelming. Sure, Turner Field did boast some of the retro modern design elements that have allowed many of the contemporary baseball parks completed in that era to survive to this day. The outdated nature of Turner Field comes from the fact that it just felt like and it kind of looked like one of those old multi-purpose venues from the 1970s. If anything, it can be argued that the facility would have been better suited for football given what Georgia State has managed to do with the place. Every time I look at FedEx Field, I cannot help but see Candlestick Park. You have the seat colors, you have the low scoreboard behind one of the end zones. At one point in time, both had exposed exterior walkways leading up to the upper decks. Sure, the Landover, Maryland facility has a middle deck and a lot more luxury boxes, but these aren't a million miles apart in terms of design. The big difference? Candlestick began hosting football in 1971 and FedEx Field opened in 1997. That is not a good thing. The stadium was disliked by fans upon opening, and it took all of a decade before the team began looking at options to replace FedEx Field. If you opened an NBA arena in the 1980s, chances are it sucked, and this is something we will see as we move on and progress with this list. As for the Meadowlands Arena in particular, well, it was just sort of this weird mess of contradictions. The stadium was new, but somehow looked outdated in the early 1980s when it was completed. The damn thing was both carnivorous and crowded. There were no redeeming qualities about Meadowlands Arena apart from the fact that it allowed New Jersey to have teams, and whether that's good or bad, I don't know. Opening a dome stadium in 1995 was a bad idea then, but that didn't stop the city of St. Louis from opening the Dome at America Center, or whatever corporate name you want to give it. This thing was a vast, ugly mistake that never looked modern. A half-hearted brick facade was not able to hide a freaking dome that looked dated. Things weren't much better inside either, where a raft of issues sprung up almost immediately and were never rectified. George Shinn is an idiot. George Shinn is a fraud. I personally hate the fact that he complained and was just bitching about how Charlotte Coliseum didn't have any premium seating, despite the fact it was a problem of his own creation. Everyone knew this was needed when the facility was being built. Instead, they jammed in a little over 24,000 seats, with Shinn believing this was a better idea at the time. Of course, it was not a good idea, even though the Hornets did manage to sell out the facility on a regular basis in those early years of the franchise. The thing though was behind the times when it opened in 1998, and it wouldn't live to see 20 years in business. Shinn left after 14 seasons, which tells you all you need to know about him and the Charlotte Coliseum. Another 1980s NBA arena doomed before it ever hosted a game. Arco Arena. It was too small, it was built too cheaply, it was just plagued with problems before fans even had a chance to attend a game. Too many corners were cut, and the result was an underwhelming building that was fractionally better than the temporary Arco one it had replaced. Here's the deal. I fondly remember going to Arco Arena. I fondly remember seeing all of the countless teams playing, including the Sacramento Knights indoor soccer, the Sacramento River Rats inline hockey teams. But even at that young age, it didn't seem all that impressive. And when you were that young, everything is impressive. So that tells you really all you need to know about how dated Arco Arena was when it opened. The Georgia Dome, well, it looks like it was a product of the 1970s. Unfortunately, this stadium was completed in 1992. That still baffles me, by the way. Who thought the Georgia Dome was a good idea? Like all domed stadiums, the only thing this one had going for it was sheer size. The roofing was a mess, and the venue had no distinct features apart from a shit ton of seats. Developers, design firms, and construction companies have made a ton of money in Atlanta over the years, building some of the crummiest stadiums known to mankind. Miami Arena is like Arco Arena, only somehow much, much worse. The project was rushed from the get-go, and what little time they did have was seemingly spent on making sure the facility had this odd shape. It's like someone placed a massive can of tuna on any of the business parks built in America around the early 1990s. Just how outdated was Miami Arena when it opened? The Heat could only manage 12 seasons there. The Florida Panthers had had enough after 5 years. Work began on a new arena less than a decade after the original Miami Arena hosted its first event. No stadium before or after has been as woefully outdated when opening as Miami Arena. So there you have it. That is our look at 11 stadiums that were outdated before ever hosting a game. One honorable mention I do want to point out, and that is Levi's Stadium. While not outdated as these venues on the list, it just doesn't really live up to the standards set by other, especially NFL stadiums built in the basically since AT&T Stadium in Dallas opened in 2009. So 2009 to today. It has a lot of bells and whistles. There's a lot of sort of buzzy features to it. But when you go to Levi's Stadium, when you watch a game there, you're kind of like, huh, this is it? Okay. So yeah, it doesn't really qualify for this list per se because it wasn't just that really old, crappy barn or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I think if we're looking at modern times, the closest thing we have to a stadium being outdated when it did open would be Levi's Stadium in San Francisco. That does it for me. I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback. Subscribe if you like. And as always, hashtag take it up to the 25.